Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Maverick Mystic Arts Podcast. I'm here today with a really good friend of mine who has a whole plethora of experience in acting worlds, as well as has done a very profound deep dive into human psychology and emotion over his career. And a really unique guy. And one of few people I've met who seems to integrate curiosity with a sincere desire to help people. And it's a really unique mix, which I respect a lot. Let me introduce you to Harley Bonner. Harley, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. It's good to see you. So I thought we might jump in sort of on par with that intro. You do have a very unique curiosity when it comes to people and what makes us who we are, as well as this background aspect of your personality and the type of feeling and energy you bring to interactions, which really seems to help people and liberate people from their own weirdness. How did that start? Do you remember, like, ever suddenly deciding to do that, or have you always been such a weirdo? You weirdo.
Yeah, I just slurp all of the weirdness and take it for myself, apparently. I think I know what you're talking about. Are you talking about, so you and I have known each other now for 2.5 years or something like that, when we were, training together and, doing all sorts of mystical, magical work. And you used to mention bits and pieces about these sorts of the kind of communication style and the I guess the type of invite or something along those lines. Is that what you're talking about?
Um, I have no idea what your version of what you're saying is relating to. So this is going to
Good.
be
This is wonderful communication.
this will be a great show. so okay,
Rephrase your question for me.
Yeah, let me say this differently. You're very curious about people, so it would seem. And so it would seem you've expressed this to me explicitly, that you have a deep curiosity for humanity and people. And there are a lot of folks I've met who are curious, but who aren't necessarily curious with care towards the object of curiosity, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, I understand what you're saying. Well, that all sort of kicked off. I've always had a compassion for people. That just seemed to be there from the very also very interested in I was interested in the action did early on. My mum is an actor and was working as an actor when I was growing up, and I took an interest in acting, and that's literally the you're reenacting life. You're essentially um, mimicking life. But I was really interested in the reality that and how I could bring reality to those performances, for example. And there was a clear difference between there was a very obvious junction between the performances that I would watch and I would feel and believe, and the ones that I wouldn't, that I would think they were externalizing. And so then because I made that distinction, there was an extra focus on that feeling quality that made it real, and that just happened to lead me into more of an internal exploration of myself, um, feeling what this person was feeling. So seeing it externally, and not just in performances, but in interactions you'd have with people. You'd start to feel what it is they were feeling, and then that would naturally lead to, well, that's happening in me, that's happening in them, it's also happening in me. Why is this happening in me? Why am I thinking this now? Why am I feeling this? Why am I feeling compelled to behave in a certain way? Why am I doing anything? And there's a root to every single thing that we do. It has to start somewhere. There's an inspiration to say or feel or do anything that we do. And so my curiosity for that, and I think my natural empathy and compassion for people combined, and the more I could feel within myself, the more I could identify was taking place in me, the more natural it became to experience somebody else experiencing the same thing, or witness somebody experiencing something that was similar to what I had explored. And then, going through acting school, and that was just like that school, for whatever reason, it was the best thing that I had done to that point. It was like 3 days a week, you just have your souls torn open, spewed out onto the stage, and for everybody to look at and for you to dissect and to become intimately familiar with a part of our mechanism that most people want to avoid, But
Mm-hmm.
for us, there was incentive, at least for me, what I identified was there is incentive in pulling all of the hidden corners into the light and acknowledging their existence. And then what I found was, and what we've spoken about before, is that the more that I came to recognize in myself the dark, the good, the bad, the ugly, the less impact it had on my habitual state of being, right?
That
And the more compassion I had for other people.
Right. I mean, that would go hand in hand as you start to acknowledge your own internal workings and pains. Um, in relation to the acting school, was your relationship with the type of training you were going through common amongst the classmates of yours?
You just broke up a little bit there, but I think I heard what you said. Was my relationship to pain a common
Was
thread throughout the class?
was your relationship to the acting training this deep dive into yourself and this sort of tele-empathic type of relationship where you feel what other people are feeling and you're reticulating between you and somebody else and recognizing the similarities between the feelingscape and the mindscape that is required, uh, I guess we could say required for each person to feel the same thing. Because I imagine that a lot of, I mean, I've spoken with a lot of actors over the years, and none of them have ever described acting or training in acting the way you have in terms of the development of yourself and your self-understanding through it.
Mm. Well, I think it wasn't a given that everybody that trained at that school goes through and experiences the training the same way. I was also at the same time beginning to get very interested in introspection. I on looking at personality traits, and I remember even, like, in between class, I'd be looking at the initiation into Hermetic's book, and then going and sitting in my steaming hot car, trying to focus for 5 minutes, and then at the same time, I'm looking at the introspective, the black and white mirror side of things. So I don't think it's definitely not what everybody experienced. To your point, that it's, maybe that's not the way that other people would describe it, but the variables of my particular situation culminated into just keep looking, keep looking, keep looking, and there was no downside to it. When you mention to people to have a look at all of their weaknesses and all of their flaws and all of their their bad side,
Mm.
they're like, how about I just don't? Because that's heaps more fun. But I found a kind of sick, not sick, it wasn't sick at all, but I found a real satisfaction in feeling everything that was there at that moment. And that led to an acceptance and a processing of that energy, and an ability to utilize it in my work, because I was in resonance with this very real human experience, that I was wanting to put into, and it was kind of the driver as to why I became an actor, because I I really enjoyed recreating life.
Right. Okay, so it was in existence prior to the acting, and that interest in actually going down the rabbit hole of, the torrential dark demon that's you, that was already present. And the acting was able to illuminate it and shine some energy on it to explore it further then.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
for
that's really
sure.
cool. And you were, yeah, it's really interesting, because you and I have talked before about basically a whole system of personal release and development that you more or less came to through acting, and this interest in people, this curiosity, and the compassion. Um, it's really something else, and very different. I mean, you've done a lot of work in the Hermetic worlds, in terms of your practice and types of training that you've done. And even in the spiritual worlds, the compassion is often lacking, and the work that's being done with people is really often for the person doing the work, not for the person that's being, helped. Um, and so that was something that always struck me about you, was the compassion side of it, and that there wasn't this serial killery type of, you know, distance and robot man type of thing going on. There was always this actual, like, real compassion. And you have a funny knack for, I mean, I've mentioned this to you before. Everyone who I meet who's hung out with you will be like, oh, you know who I really get along with? Harley. I'll be like, oh, okay, so there's something going on. And what I've been able to chalk it up to seems to be this mix. Now, with the dive that you've done in Hermetic work, when we first met, you were very, very focused on Hermetics as from within the bounds of the name of Hermetics, I suppose. And over the last few years, that kind of space that you were in, you've sort of, started to look at things from more perspectives and just a different type of freer view. What's Do you remember what the impetus was for the view to start to shift outside of that Hermetic bubble?
Yeah, I don't remember the specific moment that it started happening, but all what I could chalk that up to is that frameworks are really important to begin with, as we've spoken about. That the intellect in order to follow something and to progress step by step on that sort of course level of practice, you kind of need your floaties, you need your life jacket in some regard in order to experience what has been previously intellectually discussed and explored intellectually, and going from that intellectual basis into an experiential basis, which naturally leads to an intuitive moving forward and out of a framework. Something, it's moving up the scale out of a dense form of energy in the intellectual mind, and expanding into the reality of why that framework has been written down and created to begin with.
Mm.
And I think that seems to be the way. I don't have a great deal of experience in any other sort of system or modality, but that seems to be, from what I've heard, the same with Buddhism. They have a way to mark where you're at, mental indicators for experiential indicators, to go, okay, well, this is where you're at now, so to speak. And that's where you're at now doesn't do it justice, but there is you're here now. You can frame it, you can box it in to some degree in order to get your bearings and then move through it.
Right. The thing behind the thing, the more true thing. Just give me one moment here. Don't want to move the camera around again. So yeah, the thing behind the thing, and what's interesting, I find with this is that shift to let go of the deification of the framework or the specifics, of that particular practice or whatever. It's not something that a lot of people end up doing. A lot of people will end up, dog with a bone, working this exercise till they die, doing within the framework for the duration of a life. There's fewer and not so many people who go, okay, I'm interested in the newer thing, or not necessarily trying to make it new, but just not getting stuck on what brought you to a place. I find that's a really valuable tool for progression.
Well, I find that really what brought me somewhere generally becomes thinner in my awareness and on the scale of importance to me, and that's generally a pretty good indicator to move beyond it. Like the attachment to it seems to fall away, and how's your connection, by the way? You
It
kind
got
of freezing a little bit.
got garbled for a second, but all the words came through. So it's good at the moment.
Well, yeah, you sound like you're underwater a little bit. Hopefully it's not that way in your recording. But anyway, yeah, I think the introspective side of things really helps to break that ceiling, or to go beyond that framework as well, because it kind of functions in the same way as it is all the same thing as your personal biases and what you believe and what you've concretized and made part of your subjective reality, and deemed important. So, when we get used to recognizing that there's always more, there's always deeper, uh, there's always more release to be had, and you can start to feel the pressure of where you need to release through. When we do that with our own personality, it kind of translates to a framework as well. You go, well, why am I believing that to I need this mental form to stay intact in order to get forward? It all becomes about kind of pressure differential.
Mm.
It's like it starts to feel like the same thing. Your personality and your beliefs and what you do, it's all part of the same structure. And so when you start to feel it as a pressure difference rather than the name and the formation and the specific information that you've placed into it, recognize when you need to relax through it, move through it, release through it. But I think if we're not focusing on bettering is not the right word, but refining our character, uh, perhaps some of that goes sort of gets lost in translation, and people will get stuck in staying in a box and like, well, this is my box. This is what it is. I've got to be right. I have to, and then there's um not ulterior motives, but there's incentive of some description, whether they're trying to create a business out of it, or whether they're trying, if they're trying to monetize something, then you really want to be right if you're trying to monetize something in order to sustain, uh, sort of, I guess, your business model and your reasons for why you're doing it. And and it's a really funny thing to try to monetize. This is why it's probably so difficult. It's probably why it's so difficult to monetize this path, you know, to make it a career, so to speak, because it's just ever changing and it gets ever confusing as to how it is that you can do that in some regard. You know,
Yeah, the
it's not
confusing
it's
thing.
not meant for career. You know, hey,
Just said the confusing is a great way to describe it, because the I mean, as you're relinquishing all these forms, you mentioned the personality itself and the desire to do the particular exercise and all this stuff, the adherence to a framework, all of this stuff starts to become very clearly, as you accurately described, these type of pressure differentials and these encasements in which the pressure builds. And if you're relinquishing the forms of whatever it is, then those very forms which brought you to the place of that training will also start to erode. And that includes the forms of the personality and everything else. And I think the confusion, this, existential confusion when it comes to working with this, or like you said, monetizing it, is really, it's a weird one, because, when you sell something, typically you sell the same thing. Maybe you sell 200 different flavors of ice cream, but everyone knows they can go back and get those new flavors of ice cream. It's not like they go into the store and some days you're taking people for a walk. Other days they're buying ice cream. Other days it's a nap on a table. Other days it's like it's it's really hard to sell something that is going to actually, I guess we could say, adhere to formlessness. you know?
yeah, yeah. Because no, I don't even need to add to that. It's a conundrum. It's very funny.
I think so. It's certainly something I think about a lot. Because when you give people freedom, the the impetus to come back isn't there as strongly. You're not encouraging the that needy part in an individual that needs to accumulate and acquire more skill and more this and more that and more of whatever. you're freeing those things. So it's not just you're freeing it in yourself, and other people don't know, when necessarily what they might be getting. But also, if you're freeing that stuff in other people, then the very part of them that was in a type of lock that brought them to you isn't there anymore. And, then great, you did a great job, but as a teacher, but you almost get overlooked in terms of the value that you actually gave to someone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it is a
Mm-hmm.
tricky one. And I mean, speaking of the teaching thing, um, I know like there's been some back and forth on it. You sounds recently like you've been really enjoying the idea and this calling towards being a teacher. What's on that front when it comes to teaching? I mean, we're talking about what it means and how to do it and how to be confused about it. What is your interest and through path when you think of teaching in the near future?
It's largely just around the basics because the basics seem to penetrate throughout the whole. The basics are the most important thing, so to speak. And I think the basics are there are some barriers to entry as it stands right now in the way that humanity, at least in the West, likes to operate. And it's this frantic, ever pushing forward, ever needing to do da 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 da, which promotes mental, emotional, and obviously physical pace and static, and a feeling of just uh, chaoticness. That when you mention to somebody about meditation, you can see their eyes glaze over, or they get scared, um, or immediately they believe they can't do it. And so my focus, or one of the aspects of the focus, is just sh- illustrating and taking people through some very, very basic processes to build on their level of mental stillness, which a lot of people haven't even felt before. And it's understandable. It's not like you haven't felt it. It's like it makes sense that stillness is not uh, commonplace with your everyday people.
What was your introduction to perceiving the stillness of the mind initially?
Well, I didn't really perceive it initially. There were um, when I first started meditating, I was doing Vedic meditation through a friend of mine who was a teacher, and that just by doing the process, by sticking to the framework, um, I found that I had a lot of liberation and experience of types of liberate things that I hadn't experienced before. Really extreme, um, sort of transportational type of experiences just by saying a mantra. And but then that was interesting enough. But then what I was finding was that the more I did it, the more it leaked and permeated into my day to day life, and the more clarity and insight I would get around anything that I was paying attention to or pondering on. And that was the same time as I was doing acting school. So it happened to work in really nicely, was that my everything began to slow down through a type of focus. And then I was able to see more of what was there, which leads to seeing more of what is there, and more and more and more and more and more, because you start to get an intuitive sense of um, the the mechanisms that it takes, and the moving parts, the mechanisms that it takes to to increase your experience of stillness, for example. Like, I'm not explaining that very well, but
Well, let's walk
how
in
would I
some
rephrase
circles
it?
with it.
Yeah, so if I were to explain intellectually how to produce stillness within your mind, uh, how to gain greater insight, what that feels like, I'm just explaining it intellectually, right? It's just an idea. But when you start to do these certain things, you start to have an experience of what has been explained, and the puzzle pieces start to click together, and you intuitively understand how to get more of it, right? But as an idea, it's 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 a frightening thing because people feel immediately rejected when you talk about stillness, and they go, "Oh, I've never," and you can see it time and time again. It's a defensiveness because there is a a negative self-image around that particular thing. Because if it was real and if it was attainable, I would have experienced it by now. But it's like, well, you've got to do you got to do the thing to produce the thing. If you're doing something else, you're producing something else. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, if you want to walk forward, walk forward. Um,
Yeah. And if you want to bake a cake, you need the right ingredients.
yeah, and also, baking a cake helps in baking a cake, and not going and hitting a baseball. Um, so
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
right.
like so often all this stuff gets conflated, and it's like, okay, everything's going to be this thing. Everything's going to be some type of version of stillness, some type of meditation. And we've talked before about how, if everything can be considered a thing, then nothing is also the same thing, which makes it tricky. And of course, everything can be an expression of and a route through and deeper into and beyond meditation, but only if you're meditating or in a state of meditation when you're doing everything. And we can certainly use, anything being a doorway to everything. We can certainly use all these different avenues to like start poking in. But to acknowledge the space that's being cultivated, like you said, from an experiential standpoint, behind the activities, so things start to change. And, you made a really good point that you were going through acting school while you were doing this. It was Vedic chanting. The mantra was the extent of the meditation practice for the most part.
Yeah, it was just an internal mantra.
Right. And so what's cool is it sounds like you were getting feedback from your acting exploration in relation to the efficacy of the meditation. So instead of it being this
Mm.
unknown thing, this vague just mist that you're wandering through, it gets to bounce off of not just a career that you're cultivating at the time, but skills with it and interrelationships with people. And I mean, things that I had no idea acting could be that you've enlightened me to gets to bounce off the meditation, and the meditation gets to bounce off the acting. So it's almost its own, system of proof, proving out of the concepts. You're cultivating a type of stillness, and in the meditation, and like you said, the awareness of that stillness appears. Then you experience it in the meditation and outside through the acting, and those both become fuels for the growing fire of stillness, the meditation and the acting. And that system of proof uh, is really important, despite, like, in Buddhism, you know, it's like, okay, one of the five maras is doubt. So how do we not doubt? Well, we need to build a type of proof system or faith substance in what we're doing. And, you know, in the absence of that, you're just sort of throwing stones in the dark and trying to hit,
Mm.
a, a specific tree in a totally dark forest. But you can't see anything. And so systems of proof can exist at like so many different levels and layers of reality. Like in the internal martial arts, the systems of proof are always around, different types of structure or martial type energies or balance, stealing and destruction, or whatever. Um, it could be through a healing modality that something's you're learning to see the efficacy of the stillness that you're cultivating. Um, and I find it really interesting that it was able to bounce off acting for you. Like, what's it? Do you remember in the moment, like as meditation, the Vedic mantra meditation is starting to permeate the acting, what that was like?
I think simultaneously, because I was looking, not only were we doing the acting training, but most of the acting training, as far as I can remember, it was such a long time ago. But as far as what stayed with me, it was to what was important about that time was that we were intensely looking at our own soul, as well as cultivating this stillness through the meditation. And why did that drop away? What was I saying, Nathan?
Uh,
Sorry, ask me that last bit of the question again.
because I remember. So, so uh, acting and
Yeah.
meditation, as the stillness of meditation begins to permeate acting, not just in acting school, but as a career path, and you get to watch those bounce off each other. What is that experience like, and how is it different post working on the stillness meditation in relation to prior to working on the stillness meditation?
Yeah, so it was really, in a nutshell, it's depth. The thing I was striving for was more depth of awareness around myself and around the people I was interacting with, the communication that we would be having on stage, or you know in our scenes, and da da da. Da. I think what I got out of that, the culmination of the two, was an exacerbated version of where I was headed, like an acceleration of where I was headed, which was um, seeing more deeply, feeling more deeply, and being able to uh, not perform, but be more deeply in the given circumstances of a scene. Be more there. And be more comprehensively human in those states. I think that, at least because that was what I was somewhat unconsciously focused on, that's what I got out of it.
Mm. More comprehensively human.
Yeah. Well, because what I see a lot in performances, you know, is that it's a performance and it's an idea of what a person does in this situation. It's an idea. Whereas what I really enjoy, and the type of exploration I like to embark on, is when you're reading the script and you're feeling the words, you're feeling the world behind the words on the page, and your body starts to move into a position. You you start to feel like you start to feel like that person, and then because you've got the block now, you've got the block of clay. You just have to start looking at the block of clay. You've got the general impression, you start knocking it off. And the more you look at it, the more starts to unfold. And the more that you're aware of the depths of yourself, the more you have at your disposal to offer to this block of clay. And it happens in a very intuitive way. Uh, and that's what I'm focusing on a lot now. As my craft evolves, it's how free how freely can I employ um, the deepest parts of myself. How 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 freely are they able to come out and express themselves in this way, you know because there's, if you've got blockages and you've got fears around certain aspects of your personality, and oh no, I like this but I don't like this, you know Brad Pitt does this, so I think I better do this. And it's like, no, 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 fuck all that. That's It's what comes out of you artistically, and the scope of your paint collection uh, directly proportionate, or it's a mirror image of all of the aspects of yourself that you have witnessed and that you have accepted as a part of you, and you haven't seen them as good or bad. And interestingly, like one of the main I guess acting 101 is don't judge your character. Don't like I auditioned to play an SS youth soldier years ago, years and years and years ago, and immediately it was like, okay, well, how would I, Harley, as I am today, end up in that situation? What's the causation that would lead to me, the person that committing the same atrocities as what those kids did?
Right.
And and there are reasons and rationales as to how any person could get there. So that's the job. And the more that you're willing to accept the dark corners of your personality, the more capable you are of of not judging the character and being that character, and being completely have complete rationalization and the justification for why you're doing what you're doing. And
Right.
yeah, so that I find that really fascinating. There's certain characters that you just don't really want to touch, because later on, in as I've progressed, you just go, I'm not really interested in understanding, or sitting in that place of like a child, a predator. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. I don't. You could slice it up and still not. I'm I, I'm never going to be, you know attracted to a child. It's just not me. But if I was gun to my head, had to play the character, you could slice it up, unfortunately, to the degree that you're like, yeah, and I don't want to have empathy for that particular character, but you could find it. you know?
So don't judge a character with some limitations, uh, we could say.
Well, it's just my there's a block there for me. I'm not willing to to understand that person. Uh, you know, I don't want to feel that person inside of me. You know what I mean? Like that's what that is. Not that I'm scared of being that. Of what if I feel that, maybe that's what I am. It's like, no, you can pull in any sort of mental frequency and understand and sit in a place, right?
Well, you can use that as an excuse to do all kinds of like atrocious things, or place yourself in very unhealthy psycho-emotional states under the guise of, oh, well, I just have to get exposure to it, and I'm not acknowledging it unless I do A, B, and C. It's a slippery slope, and I do think it's very clear that there are different psychological states and the astral energy that moves and sculpts in relation to those emotional or to those psychological new views and whatever, there's real like sickness that can occur from it. It's not this malleability. It's not just all fun and games and you can just turn it off and boom, you're literally changing yourself. And if you look at a lot of the stuff we do in different meditative systems where you're cultivating an astral nature that uh, allows for the easiest path of we could say like liberation and ascendance and to have light resonate through. Uh, there's also psychologies and emotional energetic systems that give people cancer, that really fuck up the health in a really big way. And so I really think it's something to be wary of in general, like not like, let's say, outside of the acting paradigm. We want to become more and more choiceful about what we think and how we feel through freedom, not through lying to ourselves. But it seems like a big part of this is like going to weave us into the path of sincerity and authenticity. And through noting that you have the capacity within you through going, how would I be this SSU soldier? Uh, and having a peace and a stillness deeper than all of this psycho-emotional turbulence that will lead through various tendrils of life experience, depending on how you follow them. Well, that allows for, a very real honesty, a very real sincerity, a very real authenticity when it comes to how you can express. So, you're not just superficially, walking the, what is it? Superficially doing the thing. I can't think of the word, but imagine something that sounds smart and insert here. Um,
That
so
was awesome. Right, really well explained.
the something smart that you imagined. Thanks, dude.
Yeah, yeah, that was great. Wow. High
uh,
five me.
oh yeah. Um, but point being that there's some very real damage that can occur, and when we're doing this work, it seems to be a byproduct of the liberative faculty that the thoughts do start to change and the emotions that we choose to express with, those start to change as well because it becomes a choice. We're not locked into nearly as much, the habits of how we grew up or whatever. And I don't know, I think acting is a really cool way to kind of force yourself to snap out of that a bit, the way you've described it, because you're taking on essentially, if you think back far enough, like that SSU's entire life prior to the screen, you know?
Mm, mm. Yeah, that's the somewhat damaging aspect, I think. Look, and this is, I think, what we're talking about. The damages is a product of that deep dive, uh, full immersion into the psychology and emotional state and this and that of a person. Like your body doesn't know the difference between reality and what you think. You know, evidently, there's a it's so tightly connected to the mental and emotional. It's like it's almost inseparable. Well, it is inseparable. It's somewhat inseparable. It's just different layers of the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but so people could go through and do a role like an SSU soldier and not approach things in this way and come out perfectly fine. Like my mum, for example, she had a cancer storyline once, and then she developed a lump, and in I think maybe a breast lump or something like that. That she was like, "Oh my god, I've given myself cancer." She went and got it checked, and it was benign, but and it ended up going away. But it's yeah, it's definitely a weird uh, artistic pursuit. It's a very strange one.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, so when we take this back to some of your interests on the teaching front, with this interest in the basics, right? And it's like, okay, what are the basics? There's actually, let's what are the basics to you?
Well, the basics are recognizing that we are the way that we interact with this world is through our five senses, and that we've been doing that since we were born. And as a function of kind of streamlining our experience of the world, we experience an event, we interpret that event with the variables that are in place at that time. We decide, we make some kind of belief that starts to concretize around something, around a particular event. And we are experiencing these events through the five senses. And so everything that we have, everything that we interact with in our day-to-day life, we've pretty much already seen or felt or we've experienced, and we have decided, we've created a 2D label around what's taking place at any given moment. And it is about streamlining. It's almost laziness, it's memory. It's utilizing memory so that we don't have to relearn everything every single day and remain perpetual newborns.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is the
And
path of laziness, that's a great way to put it.
yeah, it is, and we are energy preserving creatures. Like we try to make things as easy for ourselves as possible. We want to be more comfortable, like, so but the way I see it is like it's the memory is there so that we don't die, right? It's like we don't want to relearn every single time we step up to a sidewalk, to a curb, a roadside curb, that we have to look both ways before crossing. There'd be no humans left if there wasn't that function. But that
Mhm.
function has been the main lifeblood of experience for people. And there was a stat that came out. I can't remember where did I hear it? Anyway, it was that we're interfacing with 400 billion bits of information every second, of which we're only taking on about 2,000 of the 400 billion. And to me, when I'm looking at it, I go, what is it that determines the 2,000 bits? It's what we have already experienced. It's what we've already seen, what we already know, because we loop our own experience. We don't see, like that time you and I, we went, let's look at our own hand and see how much it changes that time in the cafe. And the more you stare, the more that everything starts to shift. The colors change. Your perception of what you're looking at changes because we're looking at it consciously. We're actively present in this moment. And the longer that you do that, the more your perception of what you thought was taking place starts to fall away, and you start to see more of what's actually there. And that's the whole, it's moving beyond the mental constructs.
And
And
you
so
start, I was just gonna add, you start like if you keep following that train from the sensory apparatus type of meditation, is you get you essentially break what I found is you break the sense gate itself, um, in order to get to the other side of it, to the thing that is beyond the sense itself. And I have a very clear memory of working on returning essentially samadhi, right? Just maintaining focus through anapana. And I remember driving my car years and years ago, and it was becoming such a habit of any distraction, just return to the point of concentration, that the light itself, like green, yellow, red, what the meaning attached to the frequency that creates the color red starts to disappear. So meaning starts to dissolve, and red is no longer red, and shape is no longer shape. and you start interacting with a previous layer that exists, further back, but it also is like really dangerous. And so, like you said, okay,
Maybe
you
when
don't
you're
want.
driving.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, time and a place, time and a place. Some of these habits are really good, and even to the point where, like, if I go to when I'm in Thailand or any country that drives on the left-hand side of the road and not the right side of the road, uh, phrased
Uh,
purposefully. I
Call's
spend
over.
I spend like a month just walking around trying to get used to that in the subconscious memory bank for the habit to come through before I'll hop on a motorbike and start driving around. Just because
Yeah.
the habit's so deep of being on the right side of the road that being on the other side is just.
Mm.
I mean, the number of times I've been walking with somebody, probably you, many of them, who's just like, oh, I just saved your life. I'm like, oops. And it takes time, So becoming choiceful of what patterns that we are going to invest in smushing into our subconscious.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah, and it's about releasing through attention, through conscious attention, the meanings that we've ascribed to everything. Because the meanings and the beliefs that we've ascribed, or the meanings that we've ascribed and the beliefs that we've developed about every element of our existence, they the mental constructs that they are the things that cause all of the mayhem. Beliefs about any situation um, determine certain levels of stress around things. Whereas, like, okay, I'm experiencing the same thing as you're experiencing, but I'm way more stressed out about it than you are. Why am I more stressed out about it than you are when it's the exact same reality? You know, and so what I find is when we look at the basics of watching, observing in the morning, or doing a more concentrated effort to observe what's taking place, what's rising and falling in the mental landscape, and not being and recognizing when it is that we get captured by thought, by habitual patterns, by the mental structures and constructs that we've created and just gotten used to living and existing within. The more that we can pull back and observe them, and the more repetition we have in that, there is a discernible space that accumulates within your awareness that gives you the freedom to choose what you're going to engage in, as opposed to just being a slave to the habits. And then when we run that same, overlay those the exercise of watching the rise and fall of thoughts and the samadhi one pointed concentration, you have the ability to focus on what you want to focus on, whilst also maintaining an awareness of everything that wants to pull you out of that given moment, and you develop more choice. Then you run the overlaying of those two exercises and those two skills and experiences and ways of operating that you've developed through each one of the senses, and you start to see just how conditioned you are and the types of beliefs, the types of structures that you've created for every single one of your senses, and the way that they impact the mind, the way that each one of the senses impact the mind, and how you can actively, that might not be the right word, but how you can start to mold your way of being and your way of operating closer to being, as opposed to this just this structured way of seeing the same crap every single day, and seeing every instance like it's Groundhog Day, and that's
Mm.
what that's the trap, right? That's the prison of the mind, is what you've decided is real. Your subjective reality is you've created this. It's not your fault. It's a function of growing up and evolving and being a human being on this planet. That's just what happens. There is a differentiating between me and what I'm paying attention to. I think it's a necessary differentiation to go through as a child growing up. But then we need to be reintroduced to the ways to unpack all of that and and give ourselves freedom. It's an ongoing thing too, particularly if you live in an environment that stimulates the habitual patterns. If you live in a workforce, the society, like even just driving your car every day, and when you really start to watch what just driving on a road is, you're like, this is unbelievable. How weird. We're all just, okay, off we go to this place, off we go to work. Then you see all the other people going the other way, they're going to work. And we've got a line that separates us this big from from a head on crash, and the fact that all of that works, when you look at things in it through a more conscious lens, you start to pay attention to what you're actually doing every day. You go, whoa, this is wild. And just that in itself is a little explosion of expansion and seeing more of what's there. So it's incentive. There's an incentive to do it because it's fun. But what's really interesting, I find, is that the older you get without exploring this stuff, the more, it depends on who the person is, but the more egoic pushback you're going to get as well, because you're like, hang on a second. Are you meaning to tell me that I have spent the last 50 years of my life in a lie? I'm not going to accept that,
Hmm.
that I've been doing it incorrectly, which isn't true. It's not incorrectly. It's it's tough. It's a tough pill to swallow. And that's why I think on top of the aging process, you see older people who just, as well as their personality and what they have experienced and their subjective reality tightens and contracts and becomes real to them, they're so too does their body. Their body does the same thing. Everything, you know, and what's really interesting about that as well is that, just walking through the door of like physical stretching and exercise and opening the body kind of has the same has a very similar releasing quality to it. The tighter your body is, the tighter the mind. That there are correlations to it. It's not a hard and fast rule, I don't think. But when you start to look at it, you go, wow, that seems to be related.
Very, like, absolutely. I mean, there is like this. I was working with a student a few months ago who just, he's quite flexible, and he was doing some stretches just before we started. I was like, oh, pretty flexible, hey? He's like, yeah, but so stiff, so stiff. I feel, and I used to be this way myself, is I could do all these crazy flexible things, but there was this stiffness that I couldn't get away from. And this was, and so there's absolutely a relationship, like you want to stretch the body, open the body, and this will, of course, help with the ease of the mind's capacity and the capacity of whatever energetic substrate you're working with to move through the body more freely. I found there was definitely a limiting factor to the body work as a pathway forward, and that the as my depth of surrender and release to more and more refined um, light substance kept evolving, that the ability of that to open things, to open the tissue in ways so far beyond anything that I'd ever been able to do working with the body. And I spent, thousands and thousands of hours exploring it from the perspective of the body. Um, and so I found that the relationship on the other side of it was like, oh, so cool. You know, the mind's relationship to everything can have such profound effects physically. Um, that was always really, really, really interesting. Now, when we're talking about the um, the path of awareness, breaking off and opening and more, you see more, you're aware of more, and the path of focus so that you can act. What have you found to be the most, a few of the most valuable, choiceful, let's say like psychological and emotional frameworks that are very positive to build in, or, that maybe expose themselves to you as you surrender more? That might be a more accurate way to look at it, I suppose.
Frameworks that expose themselves.
Yeah, in terms of, okay, well, to use your example from earlier, putting yourself in the psychology and emotional framework of, like a child rapist isn't so helpful, to do it, to opening your heart and all of this like good psychophysiological emotional opening. So what are states that you've found to be very helpful?
Allowing yourself the luxury of time, and through the luxury of time, there's a type of space that opens up, and that starts to naturally it's time and quietude, right? Like allowing yourself time and quietude. When you're not externalizing, I find when I'm not externalizing, when I'm not talking much, and you'd find this a lot doing van life, that the external world becomes less of the focus and the internal world becomes far more obvious. And just through paying attention and just going, oh, there's that thing, there's this thing, and allowing it to be, uh, as actually we were discussing yesterday, that the black and white mirror almost does itself, because you start to recognize patterns that loop and loop and loop, or you see things that arise within your awareness internally. And because you start to see them more frequently, you start to recognize the patterns. And when you recognize the patterns, and then you see how it is that they affect you, a thought, again, this requires quietude and time by yourself. You see the emotional state that arises out of a particular thought, and it might immediately be stuck to it. They might come together, and then the way it makes you want to behave, and then the more that you get to see that, the more you accept it, the less that you are subconsciously rejecting it and pushing it away, the less impact it has, and there's a natural freedom that starts to evolve out of that. And so, I had this acting teacher say to me, I just want you to, for the next week or whatever it was between classes, whatever you feel, I want you to recognize that you're feeling it. I also want you to pay attention to how much you are trying to stuff it down and push it away. And I just want, no matter where you are, I just want you to feel that feeling. And if that means that you cry, that if it means that however it is that it expresses, let it express. Short of, injuring someone, or injuring yourself, I just want you to be okay with that being there. And what I found was that required me to be quiet with myself. It required, in order for these emotions to be present, and in order for me to actually even be able to see them, right, and witness them, and not just habitually push them away, making myself blind to them.
Mm-hmm.
And through that process, I realized that the suppressing of it is the thing that maintains its ability to exist, maintains its existence. It's that, like, what you resist persists. It's there's a subconscious attachment to whatever that is, and there's an undercurrent that is fueling this thing that you've become blind to, and that when you see it, when you let it percolate up to your from that subconscious to the conscious, it takes what some people would consider a bit of courage and bravery in this day and age to allow it to be there, and allow yourself to feel what's there and confront it head on. But as soon as you do, you realize that you didn't even realize you were treating it as a boogeyman, but you were treating it as a boogeyman, and it is not a boogeyman at all. The dark corners of our personality, when they come into the light, aren't dark anymore, right? It's not dark. It's not what you perceive as dark,
Literally
right?
by
You just
definition, under the illumination of the mind. And when we start to see these things, there's a joy at the breaking away of the habit, with that epiphany, that aha epiphany moment, as that identity breaks away that was attached to that thing, or that habit of energy. It's like if you take a beach ball and try to push it under the water, if you're trying to suppress the stuff, and it's subconscious, I just, at a subconscious level, would rather not feel like shit right now or whatever. It's it's not like it's these conscious choices. They're these, the time frame is so condensed because the habit's built so much that, like you said, if you give it time, and under the illumination of focus, of concentration, you shine a light on it, and then that fills it with more energy so it's easier to see. Then you can actually recognize that tendency to push that ball under the water. And it takes a lot of energy to keep under resistance, to just keep suppressing and pushing that thing down, or thinking about other things or whatever it is. It takes a lot of energy. And I found that that's one of the real gifts of endurance type practices, whether it's like you were with me when we did that, like some all night sits in Mexico. And, if you're going to do endurance type practice, one of the gifts from it is that eventually you don't have enough energy to lie to yourself anymore, to hold on to the illusion. And this is one of the values, in fasting for long periods of time while engaging in meditative practices, maybe limiting your sleep and that kind of stuff, is that eventually you literally just don't have the energy to support all of the fabrication of the mind and of the emotions. And I find that that's one of the biggest values of endurance type practices, for sure, is you just can't lie to yourself anymore. It's so much more painful to exist in delusion than it is to recognize those things that are present at whatever layer they might be manifesting at that particular moment, and not necessarily attaching to them, not necessarily like diving in a I'm going to deal with this sense, but in literally the shedding of light onto them, which takes us into some higher practices. What are we tuning into, and what are we tapping, and what is it touching? And the alchemical type of relationships that start occurring become quite phenomenal, because and then that's the value in having a whole freaking Rolodex of frequencies you can touch into. And so those of you who are familiar with more of energy-based meditations, you can recognize and run through you thousands upon thousands upon thousands of different frequencies, and each one will stir, different correlatory vibrations of energy, or it'll stir up the parts of us that are in contrast with the frequency running through. So that's one of the great values, I think, of exploring, say, at a very basic level, the different elements, like earth, water, fire, air, from like a vitality type of perspective, is that you stir up and can become aware of the parts of you that are in contrast to it. And then
That's one of the
eventually,
best things about doing a light practice as well. That's like, it's one of the things that stops you wanting to do the practice, and all of the resistance to doing the practice comes up and bubbles up, because it just, everything that is denser than the light is like, and you're like, ah,
yeah,
and you feel, it feels terrible. But terrible is it's a subjective term. It's what you've decided, it's what we have decided subconsciously is a negative. Feeling things is a negative, because it's not rewarded in our culture to do this type of work, right? Like, because we don't see what we don't have a clear indicator of what the benefit is, right? We don't, the idea of looking at your personality and looking deeply at everything that's there, and be willing for it to uncover itself so that it can just pass through the way it originally wanted, that energy wanted to pass through. But so one of the things I like to say to people is that there, as soon as you look in the dark, you realize it's not dark, but it's the anticipation of looking in the dark that's the scariest thing. It's like there's nothing to fear but fear itself, type of thing. And look, some people will, and no, a lot of people will find things in there that make them feel intense emotions that they have decided, to one degree or another, are negative. But again, that's another casing that needs to be transcended, that needs to be moved through, in order to realize that there is no good and there is no bad as we see it. Right? The fact that we have the parameters of good and bad is just it's a it's a it's a byproduct of the fact that there is duality in this universe. That we go good, bad, boop, 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 like we just go slap easy, slap easy. It's not what it is. Why would I perceive something as a positive and you would perceive it as a negative?
well, the same
It's
thing we were
personal. It's
chatting about
personal.
earlier is the habitual laziness of, how we become not dead in the world as we grow. And I think another part of it, like you mentioned with the light, like, um, and the reverberation and the contrast of, whatever's in contrast with it, is like the place in terms of the pain, the perception of pain, or of it being atrocious or terrible or horrible. Of course, there's the relationships to it, um, but also like the place from which we are viewing or perceiving the interaction from, like the place itself from which we're perceiving it from. So if the identity is um, more identified with the light, then all of that stuff moving is relatively easy. But when that
Yeah.
frequency is new to us, then everything moving that's being illuminated, that's what we're identifying with from the habitual standpoint. So then we are in the pits of the pain, so to speak. But then as soon as the identity flips and there's more accumulated relationship with the light, or whatever that frequency is, then all the other stuff can move freely, because the foot of the identity um, is no longer stepping on the leaves, so to speak, that the winds are trying to move. You know, so I think that's a big part of it as well. For folks who are deep in the practice, is starting to recognize where is the current manifestation of your identity, and however far back you've taken that, however far into the refinement process of light you've taken that, there's always going to be, one more thing that breaks away. um, and at each level of differentiation that occurs, it can be pretty brutal. And, often the desire to practice is rooted in the resistance to practicing, you know? And so the part of us that wants to engage in the spiritual activity, that wants to do that light meditation, it exists out of resistance to the very thing it's doing. So many people in the beginning, it's a lot of discipline to start a practice, and so there's, like you mentioned way earlier, the barriers to entry. Suddenly you're sitting there and you're not moving, and oh my God, like this isn't, I'm not used to this sucks. And you have these barriers of entry. But, as that time goes on, things will start to shift, and the layer of identity will start to just flux a little bit, and we can start to, on the other side of that flux and other side of that identity flip, then it's easy. And when we are getting used to, in the beginning, that habit of resistance being what leads us into the practice, that can be a very difficult thing to let go of later on, because that's how we literally started the thing, was under the pressure of resistance to doing the thing. So at a very deep habitual level, it becomes a part of the activity of liberation itself, while at the same time massively being a massive deterrent to actual progress, which I think is hilarious.
In saying that, if you have a good community of people who like to practice it, it's a hell of a lot easier to move through that, because it's what everybody's doing. There's that tribal part of ourselves that wants to fit in to some degree, and I found that was because I've had exactly that. Like I have resistance to doing better. I don't want to. No, God. Oh, there's, and it's funny because as if you don't practice for a few days or a week, even, it's all good. It's all good. It's all good until it's like you're back in that space. Like, oh no, I don't want to do this. Where the slipstream's gone.
Yeah, you find that still pops up, hey?
For sure. For
Mm.
sure. Yeah, it's one of the things that I definitely combat, and I'm not entirely sure. I haven't looked at it um, as deeply as I probably should, because when I go to look at it, it's like it wants to remain hidden, So I haven't efforted to dive into it, but I will at some stage for sure.
Right. I mean, the the barriers to entry seem to exist, at every kind of level, when it is time to push or release into the next thing. Uh, Sometimes I think we get accustomed to the goodness once we're resonating more fully with whatever we're working on. And, it's a type of like, yeah, I'm doing okay. I got it. And, even after years and years and years, those moments, like when that identity that is the practicer or whatever, is that goes through its cycles of falling away, and suddenly you just confront this purposelessness, this void of inspiration or passion or anything, and the discipline to practice in spite of that is so obviously of such intense density, that it's like, well, that's clearly not the way. And so you get this really, really funny internal dance that starts to happen, where the trickiest thing to move through seems to be the dying off or burning off of the part of you that's been doing all this stuff. And so Halloween fireworks. I was like, ooh, gunfire again.
I thought you
But
had I thought you had trick or treaters, and I'm like, damn, have you got like a doormat or something? What's going on?
nope, that would be some ballsy trick or treaters. Um, so uh, just like knocking on random camper vans. So barriers to entry. Speaking of.
Random white van, like the thing that children aren't supposed to do.
uh, um,
But he offered me candy.
it's Halloween. Oh no. So that aside, barriers to entry. This seems to be, at many levels, something that we all have to contend with, and how, especially from the teaching standpoint, how we navigate barriers to entry with prospective students in a way that dissolves those barriers instead of presenting them as hurdles for the student to push into. Um, because I find that this is like there's two different approaches. And the first is essentially creating barrier, creating resistance, or at least not doing anything to stop that resistance from building, you know? And so then the student has to encounter this barrier of entry and find a way to either move through it, dissolve it, whatever words you want to use to keep growing, or they stop. And, maybe that is, okay, they show up, okay, you sit, don't move for 4 hours. If you move, go home. Maybe it's, stand. If you can't stand for 3 hours, you don't move on to the next thing, or whatever it is in that particular school.
Mm-hmm.
And, certainly there's some value in that, but it seems to me, at least as time goes on, that if we can alleviate the resistance to the practice and find ways to encourage the joy of the cause and effect occurring simultaneously within that particular practice, then that kind of helps a lot with this barrier to entry, you know?
And I find that the self image of absolute competency makes the most sense. I'm sure there's value in offering obstacles for people to overcome to accumulate self-belief or a self-image of competency and the ability to achieve what they're setting out to achieve. Um, but why not just instill the competency from the very beginning? There's going to be hurdles regardless, you know?
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be not roadblocks, but the resistances that naturally arise anyway. Why add one at the door? Why keep the student knocking for 3 weeks? You know, like again, there may be. Yeah, I mean, you can see that there is validity in it, in terms of devotion. But maybe that is it's a devotional thing. Like they're so willing to do anything to get there that they'll put themselves through whatever, and that's fine. That's cool. But I just go, in my own experience, pressing up against resistance is nowhere, and then pushing through is rewarding. But I also find that it's far more stimulating and fun to know that I can drop into a state, invite in a frequency, and experience that frequency, and move through the hurdles that are there anyway, and the things the parts of myself that are in contrast with it, to move into this state of ever increasing unity with what you're paying attention to, um, and going, okay, I can do that. Let's just go, as opposed to being like, okay, I'm gonna have to fight for it. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, it is because there seems to be this interesting phenomena that a lot of the very the people who tend to excel on the spiritual path often start as martial artists. And I've been thinking about that, a fair bit. And I think a part of it is like that, like you said, that person knocking at the door for 3 weeks or whatever. The the degree of pain internally, of existential angst, of the, I don't know, the fucked upness that would make someone want to pursue a career in martial arts where you are practicing imposing your will on people and controlling the environment is so strong and so dense that it creates that insanity that will get someone to just doggedly and to their own detriment often just, do the work and just go, just bulldoze it. It also seems that as the progression occurs, many that start with the martial arts get stuck, and never move beyond that, 3 weeks of knocking at the door mentality, that thing that got them through the door in the first place, is often very difficult to move beyond. So when we look at the densities of where we might be coming from, how that starts expressing through activity, and then all this spiritual stuff. So from like a teaching standpoint, when we're looking at, say, the basics, right, and something as simple as, okay, how far can a basic concentration exercise take you? How far can a basic, more obtuse concentration exercise like watching the thoughts take you, in relation to all of this stuff? And when you start applying a frequency relationship, an energetic relationship to those two possibilities, the world's your oyster, so to speak, from, a practice standpoint. With all this stuff that you've done, I don't know, are you open to chatting a little bit about impending fatherdom?
Yeah, sure.
Sure. Okay, cool. I have no idea what that would feel like, as the months go by, from with all the work that you've done, how are you relating to the idea of the child, the in the now moment of, the pregnancy, what is that like?
A lot of it for me has been basically being in a good state of mind, and offering nurturing energy even at this stage, 5.5, 6 months into the pregnancy, and setting a foundation for them to arrive into. That's been one of the main focuses for me, and I haven't gone dog on a bone with it, because what's interesting is, I had said to my wife, I need to go away and I need to train, I need to practice, I need to do this thing that I know that I have to do in my life before I have children, right? And that was an idea, right? That's an idea, and you have all these ideas around what you'll do for the child with the particular ability and skill that you have, understanding frequency and vibration and the whole Hermetic framework. But the more that time goes on, the less I'm realizing, the less I need to do anything other than offer that frequency, that bedrock of um, of comfort, and of safety, of nurturing, and of something, you do it that in your own way, and everything that I do in my life offers a unique bedrock anyway. But it's less about uh, actively doing and more about being, and that's and we talk about setting goals, right? The trouble with setting goals is that the version of you that's setting the goal is different to the version of you that will receive the fruits of the goal, right? And quite often, people you see, let's say financially, for example, like, okay, I want to be a billionaire. They get to be a billionaire, and they realize it didn't fill the hole that they thought it would fill. It was like because the version of them who had set the goal and wanted the thing didn't have the full scope of what that even meant to begin with. So when it comes to my child being born, I just want my child to be born, like, and that's it. Like, it's that simple. The being and being here presently, consciously, as opposed to off somewhere else and missing the whole thing. You know what I mean? It's everything is consolidating itself in terms of the practice, in terms of what it all means. It's concentrating itself down to almost nothingness. It's in a really weird way, in a really great way, a way that doesn't have the form. There's form aspects, but it's become far more simple. It's like anything that any practice that you do, any skill that you acquire, anything that you've done for a long time, it starts to appear far more simply and consolidated within your awareness than it did when you were looking at it from this intellectual written out framework.
Mm-hmm.
All that behind me, right?
Yeah.
So now it appears far more simply, and I'm assuming that it gets ever more simple, that I go, I don't need to do anything, right? Like, I will action things, I will do things as I feel but why do I think I know, aside from laying this foundation, which is where I'm at right now, why do I think that I know what to do better than the universe knows what to do? Like, yeah, you play with all these things and you experience all these things, and you develop a breadth of awarenesses and possibilities. But I almost feel as though why? Why? I don't know. Why would I? Why? And it's so funny because you go, okay, I'm going to go and learn all these things, and this is going to change my life. And it does, in a multitude of ways, and really interesting ways. But the idea, perhaps, when you move into Hermetic arts, for example, like there's a feeling of control, that you can employ, a level of control over your own life that you can employ. But right now, I just go, pretty sure whatever put this whole process, this whole universe together, it feels mathematical, and it feels pretty succinct. It's not random. I don't feel it to be random. So all I can do is mind my own P's and Q's, do what I can do internally, rather than trying to externalize anything. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, trusting future Harley to have his own back as well,
Yeah, yeah,
without
yeah,
needing to try to, have like impose present Harley onto, and present situation and present environmental relationships and stimulus and thought processes and whatever onto the future. And it's like, okay, if we can trust ourselves in the present moment, as time unfolds, this idea of controlling the future based off the haphazardness of, you know, whatever that past present was, is you know, it starts to seem quite erroneous. And you mentioned like laying the foundation, so not trying to like do you know, do specific expressions, we could say, but laying a foundation. And I remember there was a point you made a big jump in practice, and you were talking. We had a lot of chats about how you were preparing the space. You were putting a lot of emphasis in the practice on preparing to actually do the practice to the best of your ability instead of just jumping in haphazardly. And so when you mentioned laying the foundation, it reminded me of that a lot. Is like, okay, you weren't preparing the space to try to have a specific experience, you know, or a specific outcome, but, you know, to really maximally allow that full present stillness and everything that comes with it to, you know, bubble up and be a thing that's there, you know, or a non-thing that's there, whatever words, you know, most are most palatable.
Mm.
It made me think of that a lot. And, you know, to look at the laying the groundwork, or, you know, an energetic foundation through the quality of your presence, you know, as it evolves. I think that's quite powerful.
Yeah, and what just came up then was there's been a feeling, a consistency, I guess it's consciousness, throughout my whole life, this feeling of warmth, you know, this feeling of not aloneness, you know, never lonely, alone but never lonely type of thing. Um, it's almost like a warm hug, you know, and that's maintained itself throughout my whole life. And really, I've seen how that has guided me in every instance to the best possible outcomes that I couldn't have even imagined. So it's that faith, it's that feeling of God, it's that feeling of unity, it's that connectedness that's there to your spirit family, to whoever it may be that is guiding you along your journey, and that feels very present to me. But that's the foundation, because uh, if that's there, I don't have to do a thing for this child in that regard, because that's also guiding me as a parent. Do you know what I mean? That's guiding me throughout my life in every possible aspect, and it always has. So having faith in that whatever that is, as opposed to ignoring that and deciding I need to control in some kind of manufactured way. It as much as you would like, you know, you go, oh, I'd really like to do this. I'd like this thing. Um, and I generally feel the things that are ideas about what would make me satisfied fall away very efficiently. And they go, okay, but now go this way. Now this is when we do employ control to some extent for ourselves, and seeing where the roadblocks are in our ideas and our beliefs about what's possible for us to achieve, right? What's possible for us to um, to accomplish in our lives. If we feel internally by that same force, that through line, to move in a certain direction, and I don't, for example, to use myself as an example, that's when I need to step in, release more. It's like, oh, that's when I need to step in. It's when I needs to step out of the way, or me needs to step out of the way, and I need to let go more. And look at the resistance. By looking at the resistance, that darkness, the thing that we're trying to suppress, shine the light on it, the darkness disappears, and you move through it. But if I am allowing my habitual state to determine what I'm going to do, it's like at that point you go, okay, now I know what I can do in order to best aid my evolution in that regard. And that to me at this stage, everything always shifts, perspective always changes. At this stage, that feels most true to me, and most relevant. Um, yeah.
Well, I mean, it makes me think of like, you have often these two ways of navigating things. One is the path of least resistance, and the other is, Stoicism 101, 101, the obstacle is the path, right? And so I think,
Mm.
it's an interesting way of navigating it, because a lot of people will look at those resistances from the doing it standpoint, go, oh, okay, I'm going to step on that thing, that obstacle, that rock, and I'm going to step on it, and I'm going to take care of it and conquer it or whatever. But to look at those, like you were saying, as indicators as to the parts of us that are so stuck that they cannot ebb and flux and shift and move, and allow us to actually surf that wave of synchronicity, of the most opportunistic present, exploration. Uh, and so sometimes I wonder, like, allowing those things to arise naturally or actively seeking out as soon as you notice the first bit of a resistance, diving into it, like head first, or working on it in more of the surrender type of way. Because you get like pig-headedness on both sides of the coin, right? The the one that the path of least resistance is to run away from those moments where we're not finding that easy serving, uh, or to, to be able to differentiate, I suppose, is what I'm getting to, like, because you mentioned you've had this sort of warm hug type of feeling of being, we could say, like, looked after in a sense. And how have you differentiated between when it's a positive resistance, where it's just inhibiting your movement in the correct way, and when it's one that's showing you that you're actually going in the wrong direction?
There's a certain feeling of not imposter syndrome, but inauthenticity when I am deciding to do something rooted in an idea, as opposed to an internally spiritually impelled thing to do. If it feels really yuck, I won't do it. But there's a difference between feeling yuck and feeling or scared. Like feeling this. I there is if I don't act on some, if I don't push through some resistance, and then it stays with me also, and I feel the tension of it constantly, and it's this something that's it's nagging. It's a nagging thing. This is where you need to go. This is where you need to go. This is where you need to go. And it's every part of me that, again, is not in resonance with what I'm supposed to be doing, that is screaming at me, and that feels like pain. So there's a subtle but also kind of obvious um, feeling quality, a difference in feeling quality that arises out of the two. And I very rarely nowadays, oh no, I very rarely have done things that I felt were going to negatively impact me in an off-centered way. Like it's always felt aligned with where I'm supposed to go, you know? Because I think the difference is when you have that warm heart type quality leading, you know, navigating the ship, and not the intellect navigating the ship, you can be pretty sure that you're going to find land. You know, you can be pretty certain that that's guiding. You know, it's the intellect, it's the ideas, it's the fabrications of the mind that aren't in, cohesion with the heart space. And I very rarely use the heart space, by the way. I've been contemplating that, being like, everybody talks about the heart space, but now it's making sense in this moment. Uh, when this is disconnected from this, you're going to run into all manner of silly obstacles that you don't need to encounter. And I find this actually a lot in when I'm talking to friends about relationships. A lot of relationships are they're started based on an idea that they believe subconsciously is going to fix their problems, right? They think that if they look like this and then they act like this, then we'll be happy. But then they look a certain way that fits the bill, and then they don't have the personality that the person had decided that they're going to have. So then it's rocky ground. But then you go, why did the person in your mind need to have the personality that you had ascribed? What does that do for your idea of you? What hole does that fill? Because it's filling a hole. You're trying to fill a hole rather than taking a look at the moving pieces of your own soul, your own personality, your astral, and consolidating them, accepting what they are, and living out of this idea, this frantic place, living back in here in some form of authenticity. And because when you got authenticity, you're going to naturally attract something of a likeness, something that is attracted to that same frequency. And if you're here, if you're in you, if you are really in within your own being, and you are present in your own being, and you get used to that being the dominating guiding light, you're going to find exactly what you need, you know, as opposed to what you think you need.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean that like attracts like, so to speak, and the that, as you're saying, that authenticity, that openness, that sincerity, um, and everything that allows that to actually come into the the foreground, or that allows it to become more and more real and more true. Um, and looking at everything that inhibits that. And this is what I think so great about the deep exploration of the black and white mirror, not as like, oh, I'm going to do my black and white mirror of the soul, but allowing it to unfold. Because the same as in, like you're describing, in relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, whatever type of ships there, the relationships with the spiritual path, and with that guiding light, that guiding warmth, it's the same part of us that is creating these ideas, creating these points of separation and distance, and just manufacturing all kinds of creative capacities to, like you said, what's the idea of this person going to offer me? What's the idea of spiritual union and divine union and all the weird spiritual skill sets. What hole is this going to fill? um there's because it applies across the board. It all seems to apply across the board. And one of the pillars or foundations that I've noticed in you and our conversations over the years is this real connection to and appreciation of authenticity, whether it's in acting performances that you're watching or trying to do yourself in your own meditation, in your own relationships, friendships, every conversation that you have. There's a real connection to authenticity and importance placed on that. And I really think that, sincerity, integrity, coherence, this all lies at the crux of this whole thing. It's like that's what it seems to come down to. And it's easy to fall off the rails from one layer, like to just dive into the astral side of what that means, or the emotional, energetic side, or the psychological side, or to look at it in isolation, and to not let that relationship to authenticity permeate as many layers as we're capable of opening to it. And that's been like a real takeaway for me from our chats, has been the depth of authenticity that we can actually move towards, and that we can touch and connect with and unify with. Because it's so easy to, when you do a lot of meditative work, to like the skill at releasing or just moving around these things, like it gets to such a point where I've had people try to do work with me, and just that habit of surrender is so deeply built that they can't grab on. Their samadhi is not stronger than my release, so they can't hold me in that space so that I can have to confront it and deal with it. Which can be of great value when someone can actually like take you and like, nope, you're looking at this now, and no. So through chatting with you, I've always found that it taps me into a different relationship with sincerity, a different relationship with authenticity, and it's something I really appreciate. Um,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, likewise. And I've always found that I mean we get along because you have such a willingness um to hear, um like for example, the time I didn't remember saying this, but you said you thought you had your shit together, and then I said, "Yeah, you're like this type of person." And you went, "Ah, crap," because you thought it
uh,
was gone.
uh-huh.
You thought it was dealt with, but you could still sniff it out. It was still present, and I really appreciate yours and anybody's willingness to meet me at the place I like to sit, and it's what is perceived on the outside as a vulnerable space, but once you're in it, you go, "Oh no, this is very, very liberating to be able to see clearly, to communicate what you see clearly, and to have." This is one of the most important aspects, is to have the other person's best interest at heart when you're having these conversations. Because, for me, the the way this circles back to exactly what you said at the start. The what was the word you just used? You used authenticity. The authenticity is of any person is the thing that I find most magnetic about any person. You know, if that's there, I can connect with the person. I can meet them. Um, and the compassion added into that equation, leads to really interesting conversations that I think help people to move beyond the self, with a compassion for themselves and a feeling of warmth, of comfort, of knowing that this person that we're having the conversation with, and it's in that bedrock, it's in that foundation, knowing that that person, you feel it, wants the best for you and is willing to help you look at the aspects of your astral personality that aren't in service to your authenticity and to your greatest good. Because your authenticity is just beingness at its highest. I think authenticity, like it's what's the most you, what is the most you in that moment, what's taking place in that moment. And honesty, what's really funny is when, you know seeing it can be brutal, but when somebody's honest with compassion, it's like, oh shit. But they're just honest, and you can't really be mad at them.
Mm.
You know, I mean,
Yeah.
some people can be, but if you know that you're starting from that place of open honesty and a love and a compassion, and you can feel that between two people, and the intent is to, in the most nurturing way possible, move through what it is that we're endeavoring to move through, and be better. To evolve, to see more. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, that's what I was, like you said, what I was sort of trying to push into in the beginning of the conversation was this compassion. And it's funny, you read my mind in the moment when I was like, oh, compassion and authenticity, like, where are those two gonna tie? And we found the wave. Um, that aspect of having somebody's best at heart. And if we go back to, say, the relationship standpoint that you mentioned you have conversations with many friends about, I've been finding that a very interesting and positive way to engage with friends, potential like dating scenarios and everything, is to go into it not for what can Nathan get out of this, not for what ideas I have about whatever and whatever and whatever, but to just do my best to be as present as possible, as real as possible, as sincere as possible, and sincerely want good for that person, whether it's a student, um, or a friend or anything else, for the world from a spiritual development perspective, to sincerely want good, um, want the best for somebody. It changes things a lot, and it changes. I found it's changed. It's changed my teaching drastically to the point where I can't even call it teaching anymore. And it certainly changed how I engage with the dating life, drastically. Just And it sounds so simple, just wanting good for some. How hard is it really
Mm,
to just want the best for somebody? But
mm.
everything that gets in the way of that is, me, right? Um, there's
Well,
so much power in it.
when
Sorry, go
sorry,
ahead.
sorry, continue.
I'm done my idea.
Okay, good. Thank God. No,
You can really waffle on,
no, but when when we are when we're fascinated by our own inner workings, and we are um, sort of, our main focus is being as authentic as possible, that produces a certain state of mind, right? It's like the tuning fork of truth. You want truth. That's all you want, right? When that tuning fork's alive in us, then every encounter we have, we're looking at the person through the same lens, and we're fascinated by what's taking place in front of us. And it becomes about seeing this person really seeing who this person is, and you start to see either somebody gets very uncomfortable because their shit starts to go, oh, what they're seeing. Like I have, Nat's friend said to her a while ago, my wife's friend said to her, oh yeah, Harley's terrifying. And she was like, why? And she's like, because you can see that he's really looking at us, you know, like he can really see us. And I didn't expect that, but it's something that I reference a lot now because that is something that allows that person in front of you. You're giving them permission, for a lack of a better term. You're enabling them to be that version of themselves because you're being that version of you. And encounters become about that rather than what the personality and what the ego wants to get out of a situation. So that's one of the one of the great byproducts of doing introspective work is you really get to know who you are, which is none of the things that you think. And then when you're there, you get to see other people for who they are, which is none of the things that they think. And the maintenance of a relationship or friendship from that point it depends on their willingness to continue down that line of inquiry in themselves that you've stimulated, and they know is required in order to be in your orbit. And that's when you start, you really pull in the people that are important to your path because you are standing in the shoes of in your true form, in your shoes. It's closer to your true form than if you're in ideas and you're in ego and you're in all these things. And you're now ego again I don't think is a negative thing. It's an accumulation of ideas and concepts and beliefs, and characteristics, and whatever that reveal themselves when you're present and looking at it, and you start to pull it all the way back down to who you are, closer to your core. The fact that I'm talking right now and expressing, I'm doing that through my personality and through my ego. So it's not completely separate, but the resonance with something higher than the basal layer of characteristics and needs and desires and cravings and da 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 da. That's what I'm talking about. And that's refinement. That's the product of refinement. And yeah, you and I have had this friendship for a couple of years now, 2.5 years or whatever it's been, and it's because both of us are willing to go there. Both of us, and it's not a willingness to go there, but it's all right, hey, and that's where we meet.
Mm-hmm. There was something I was chatting with a friend about a couple of days ago as well, which was, meeting each other from a place of openness and of understanding that we could say like the backbone, if truth is the tuning fork, the backbone of that truth itself, it can be a type of mutability, an openness and acceptance and offering to you in this case of the freedom to change, to shift, to ebb and flow and dance and evolve, and to not hold you now to what you were yesterday when we talked, or last week, or a month ago, or a year ago. And so I find that there's this, the access to and the relationship with that tuning fork of truth seems to, and like I'd love your view on this, seems to, for me, ride on a backbone of acceptance of and accumulation of a relationship with change itself, with movement and shift, and the equanimity that is allowed to evolve when the elements can flow and shift and evolve as needed, without being locked into shapes of so-called truth. Does that kind of make sense?
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, truth.
mhm.
It's that truth. It's truth, not in a concept. The conceptual idea of truth is a weird one. You know, um, authenticity seems to ring more true, but the tuning fork of truth seems to ring more true. Like truth.
Well, it's like
Almost
the bell of
doesn't,
authenticity being
because true
rung
that the
by the.
tuning fork of truth. Yeah, but it's like the idea of saying I want. It's like, what's the truth? That feels more coarse
Mhm,
than does the tuning fork of truth. It feels more like you're trying to come to a conclusion with what's the truth,
mhm.
rather than living by the tuning fork of truth. They feel different.
Right.
Um,
Like the expression of
yeah,
the tuning
for whatever
fork
reason.
can come out in a million different songs, but the idea of confining the truth to a particular idea is no. All of music is you know uh, insert specific pop song, right? Uh, and so
Yeah, it's almost like going guilty. That is the truth.
exactly,
Guilty. You're in a
exactly.
courtroom.
You are condemned to the illusions of manufactured truth, um, or
Yeah.
sentenced to rather, and yeah, that is something that I find to be quite interesting these days is the malleability that the truth of your current iteration of authentic expression and beingness and acceptance offers. There's a saying that Jordan Peterson had, which seems to fall in line with this, which is, act as truthfully as you can in this moment, you know, and the most correct thing that can happen will happen, whether it seems bad in the moment or not. Um, and I find that to be a really interesting through thread when we look at this from the perspective of resonating with refined light, is that sometimes, like you're doing the thing that is in resonance with that light. And there's no resistance to it. You don't know why you're doing it from a lower emotional standpoint or from a perspective of trying to logic it out. It seems like the wrong thing to do. Like it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. But then when you look back in time, it's like, oh, of course, that was the perfect thing to do. Um, so it's these very interesting types of experiences when you do have the comfort to sit, or as you were describing it, like to sit in the illuminated, no longer dark corners, to allow all of these things to be present, and the types of um, like karmic webs that start to tendril out from that space.
I've got a perfect example for you. I mean, you know this story, but I can tell it again for your listeners.
Go for it.
On the note of following that light, even if you're like, this on the surface level feels like a really stupid idea. This is a bad idea. But there's a part that's the intellect talking, and the internal part of you, that light part of you, is propelling that forward, and it's going, no, this is where you need to go. So I was working on a TV series, and I've just worked for quite a few years, to get back into the position that I had been in. Lost a bit of momentum in my career. I got back into a position that was, on this TV series, that was going to be something that I was on there for 3 years. It was a really great next stepping stone and platform to pursue my, sort of my end result, as you'd put it. I don't know as you'd put it, but as it's put. And 7 months in, we're in the midst of the COVID caca, and the production said everybody needs to get vaccinated if you want to come back next year. This was, my first year, halfway through my first year. And for probably 10 years prior to this, I had been sort of had people tell me about what may or may not happen governmentally, and the sort of controls that we put in place in different forms. And when this all started to happen, that light started to ring. And I had other people around me who were like, see, this is what I'm talking about. And I go, okay, yep, this has been said to me for a long, long time. And so I said, I'm not going to get vaccinated, and ended up having to leave the show. Now, I just proposed to my wife. We're about to get married in a few months' time. I was, going to buy a house. I was going to do all these bits and pieces with this next stepping stone in this idea of the life that I was supposed to live. And suddenly that was just ripped away from under me. And I was like, this was not the plan. This is not at all what we set out to do. What's going on? Like, why is this? But I feel this is what I'm supposed to do. Anyway, a couple months later, I'm in the dark and I don't really know where life's going. And then our mutual friend and teacher, Mark, posted this thing on his YouTube saying, I'm taking my Vimeo channel down for all these lessons. And I just went, oh my God, how much worse can this get? Everything's just being pulled away. And he said, it's the same video. He goes, but I want to take on, a handful of existing students to come and learn full time. Now, this is something that I had wanted to do since I was a kid. And it was starting within about a month. And I went, oh my God, suddenly it just hit me. And I went, oh my God, I feel myself already there. I was like, oh God. And then I turned to my left and there's my wife asleep in bed. And I'm just like, oh, and my soon-to-be wife's asleep in bed. And I went, oh my God, how am I going to tell her? Oh God. So the next day, I went out and did my thing. I came back and I said, listen, there's something I've talked about. I told you that I at some point will end up going away for a year. And she went, yeah. And I said, well, how do you feel about this year coming? And she was like, oh, and she starts crying. And I said, look, I haven't decided that I'm going, I just want to see how you, and she said, no, I'm only crying because it's perfect. Like, you have to go and do it. This is your time to go and do it. So then I get married. And then 2 weeks later, I leave to go overseas and study full time and basically tick off my number one bucket lister. So had I not listened to that internal impelling and listened to what I thought was right intellectually and what I thought the plan was, I maybe would never have gotten an opportunity to do the thing that I wanted to do the most out of anything. So even if it on the surface, on paper, it looks wrong, but you feel as though that's the way to go. You got to go. And the more that you listen to that, the more that you see the fruits of that labor unfold, and you see how, in hindsight, that was the best thing I could have done. There's the faith. That faith accumulates in that guidance, that internal guidance, that light, that warmth, and the connection to it becomes more robust and more refined at the same time. Go figure.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's such a great example.
Yeah. And now we're here, and I couldn't be happier. Something else that happened that was crazy. The entire year was going to cost X amount of dollars. Mark, he didn't charge us to train with him, which was the most invaluable gift that you could be given. But we just had to take care of ourselves, right? So the year he said, I budget for 25, 30 grand. And I happened to have saved $30,000 to go away and do this, from the job. The job that I just gotten supplied me just enough money to go away and do what it is that I really need to do in my life, what I really, really want in my deep in my being. I know I'm supposed to do this. Just the right amount of money. I do the year, and then at the end of the year, we're coming to the end. I'm running out of money. I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to go back home. I don't know what's going to happen. And then I get a residuals check from the same show, which is, if you don't know what it is, look it up. Residuals check for $30,000. So I was in exactly the same financial position as when I left, but I just experienced the thing that I wanted the most.
Yeah, that's such a perfect story to, illuminate, like, it's the perfect circle, for just showing what can happen, like when everything goes right in relation to listening to that higher part of yourself. And then there's the looking to, we often look at the synchronicity and such from the perspective of ourselves as the protagonist of the story and the center of that karmic web. But then there's also every other peripheral center, everything that you were a periphery to, and all the other individualistic centers that's maybe a better way to look at it, all the other individualistic centers that you were a peripheral little spot of light on, or however you want to describe that. When we look at, the incomprehensible nature of cause and effect, it can never be, it's just mind-boggling. Like there aren't really words for it, because it's so vast, it's so crazy. And like, we're all the hero of our own story. And it's an interesting exercise to look at where, to someone else's protagonist, what are you? And how did you contribute to, hopefully positively, the further actions and web of those people you encounter? And so when we look at, okay, you follow this light, you end up in Mexico. I do the same thing, end up in Mexico, and okay, who do you meet? Who do you interact with? The woman who made those awesome smoothies, and boom, you have these interactions, and bang, suddenly her life is totally shifted and changed. Myself, the way that, our conversations have affected me, and through me, anyone else that I interact with. And when I start looking at it from these karmic tendrils and how they go out, this ripple effect, the efficacy of, or the system of proof that ripples out from that when it comes to, okay, how do I live in as much sincerity and alignment with, this light as possible? And that's, one of the greatest gifts you can give someone, I think, is to tune them more and more thoroughly to this light, we could say, to free a person more and more fully into this space, into this light. And that's sort of at the underpinning of, I think, any really good teacher, is all the other little things. And honestly, probably a good parent. Like I've been chatting with a student of mine who's loving being a grandparent. And I was like, oh, like, why? Like, how's it different? And he was telling me, well, you get all the good things. It's like you get to parent, but without messing up, essentially. But, you don't have to bear that burden. And basically, you just keep the door open for the kid. You don't have these ideas of what that kid's supposed to be and do, and how they're supposed to act, and you're not invested in that way of, oh, they should have this career and blah 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 blah. You just allow for that openness and allow for the light, essentially the light of that child, to start to shine forth on its own. And I think there's so many crossing points and crossover points, and how you described that warmth of knowing that you're sort of taken care of, and your life seems to be at least from an external perspective, of really great expression of how it can manifest so positively when you do follow that. And of course, when you follow that light. And of course, I'm not in every nook and cranny and moment of your life. And I'm sure there's moments where it's like, fuck. But, when we do follow that, it's not always the best. And sometimes there is this question mark of like, what am I even doing right now? But on the other side of that, like as we keep moving, things start to show themselves. And I think it's just from a health standpoint, psychologically, if we start looking at every decision we've ever made in all of ever, and every decision that anybody else has made in all of ever, and everything that has happened cosmically in all of ever has happened exactly as it's happened, which has led to exactly this moment for this particular point of light in that karmic web in this moment, right? It's all happened exactly as it did. And right now is happening exactly as it is because of all of that. And, it leads to such a profound, I think it's a very healthy type of mindset if we're capable of existing in that space. That it brings choice into a very interesting type of light, and it brings this expression of synchronicity and this through flow into a very interesting type of light. And it was one of those insights that came just lying in bed looking at the ceiling of the van in the middle of the woods somewhere, where you're not like doing a practice, you're not doing anything, but there's stuff that's happening, and we're all part of something. We're all part of something. And there is that connection. And the more we can start to tune into it, and accept what's going on, and look at it from a perspective of, well, this is the thing happening, and it couldn't have not happened because it did happen, right? And it sounds so dumb. Like I understand for anyone listening going like, oh, dude, obviously. Like it sounds so obvious. It sounds like when I talk, I'm like, yeah, obviously. But also there is a profundity there. There is a depth there. And it carries forward. It carries through time going forward. And it gives efficacy to the moment you're experiencing right now, as being important. And I think there's a lot of value in recognizing the importance of this moment, this present, and what you're offering to it right now. Yeah. Yeah, man. I think that's probably a really good spot to start to wrap this up on. Because we've been chatting for a good, probably almost 3 hours here. Is there anything that's bubbling up that you want to express before plugging anything that you might want to plug?
No, no, no. I mean, it's the conversation has reached its spot.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on and uh, dealing with the tech issues at the beginning of this. And man, it's always really great to catch up with you, and I appreciate you being willing to do it on camera.
Oh yeah, no worries, man. No worries. Also, on the plug note, I'm not far off releasing a meditation fundamentals course on everything that we're talking about, for the five senses, understanding, the practices of watching the rising and falling away of thought, concentration, and how those things produce more stillness, and then through more stillness, more insight, and then this natural intuitive path forward. Because it's without a framework, if you're just beginning, some people they're just phenoms, and they just go boom, and they just take off, like the guy that I saw that you spoke to, the most recent podcast before. I've only listened to a little bit of it, but he just had such a beautiful natural progression into that work, and led by light into what he was supposed to do, which is exactly it, right? The interesting thing, on a side note, is that he found himself in that place because he had nothing else to do, and he was out in nature, and it was just quietude and stillness, and aside from the family aspects of things. But he found himself in the right conditions happenstantially to lead him to certain insights and impellings to move and do. And it's a great example of everything that we're just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway,
And
I'm not far off release.
Just for those who are wondering which podcast that is, it's the one with Michael Smith, Dr. Michael Smith, and there's 3 of those. The first of which is the one you're talking about, which is the one that dropped yesterday, because this will come out in like a number of weeks.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, just because I'm trying to do one release a week. Apparently, that's like a good way to
makes
do
sense.
it. Yeah. So people who like, when that does come out, where's the easiest place to find out about it? This course that you're putting together.
It'll be at Modus Meditations. I think that's the website name. We've made a new website. I think it's modusmeditations.com.
Perfect.
Or you can go to my Instagram, Harley. What is my Instagram?
I don't know.
Harley MPB is my Instagram, and there'll be a link there too. So if you want to check it out,
Perfect.
Appreciate
Well, I'll
it.
throw your Instagram and the website. I'll get you to send me a link to the website, and I can do the Instagram one on my own. I have those tech skills. Perfect. So links will be there for that when it comes out. Thanks again for coming on. If you want to stay on for a minute longer, I'm going to close out, and then I want to ask you something off air. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I appreciate your time. Those of you who made it all the way through to the end, well done you. If you're interested in my work, you can check out the courses on the website in Tai Chi and in Qi Gong, meditation, Hermetic magic, and the spiritual side of things. There's also a Q&A video reference library there called the Zen Den. So if you're looking for specific training tips and you have any questions, you can hit me up there, and I'll upload video answers for you with in-depth training modalities and practices as well that you can explore. All right, thanks a lot.
It's like you've been doing this. It's like you've been doing this for 10 years.
Thanks, man. I'll keep that on air. All right, bye, guys.